At the end of Lesson 6, I showed you some really cool geometrically perfect crop circles in the Flower of Life form. Most people didn't like that, or care, so instead I offer you this. This intense drawing was done by Leonardo da Vinci, proving that he actually studied the Flower of Life form. In fact, over 200 drawings of his were found, all studying different angles and proportions, complete with descriptions of each one. The editor of the book who published these lost drawings didn't really know what they were, so he just said this is how he came up with his gear inventions. Leonardo was able to invent such intricate inventions and designs because he studied divine proportion. Also, Leonardo was a master mason, and it's clear that he most likely got his original knowledge from them. Is the Flower of Life, among other things, the secret information that the Masons have been keeping secret for the last 1,000 years? Today, I was going to look at spirals and sequences found all throughout the universe, which is pretty important, but at the last minute I decided to change it because I want to show you something else. Now, in the comments or end credits, depending on where you're watching this, I posted links to a TED Talks video by Garrett Lacey, a particle physicist who tells us of an amazing discovery in the scientific field. I want to show you and talk about his findings, and then we'll look at dimensions after that. Okay, so Garrett has discovered that by examining coral, they found that each coral head has thousands of different polyps. These polyps are constantly budding and branching into genetically identical neighbors. Through performing heat experiments on these polyps, they were able to find that every single polyp is part of a whole, a single unit of being, but each one is experiencing its own reality individually. From their findings with the coral, they were able to look at quantum mechanics. See, the mathematics of quantum mechanics shows us exactly how our universe works, and we see that everything in the reality is just continually branching into new possibilities, just like the coral. As humans, we are individually experiencing only one of these possibilities, much like the individual polyps. What physics is telling us is that everything comes down to geometry and the interactions between elementary particles. Things can happen only when things are perfectly balanced. So Garrett starts showing us some subatomic particles and the things that make up electrons and protons and neutrons. We always consider these to be the smallest particle, but we never think about what's creating them. Garrett demonstrates to us how the particles that create point particles really work. He shows that when you plot them out in how they move, this is what they look like. At the tiniest scales of the universe and how it works is very beautiful. Now, look at this. This is one of the ways that these charges branch off from each other. As you can see, it flows in a hexagonal pattern, the same pattern that we found in the expanded Flower of Life. Then, if you rotate this pattern in 6-dimensional charge space, you see it forms yet another pattern. Many of you will recognize this as the shape of the Star of David, but its true name is the star tetrahedron, which maps perfectly over the fruit of life. This entire pattern created by the particles is mapped across over precise places on a 200-dimensional spherical shape scientists have called E8, of which also has a geometric shape. By rotating that shape as well, you can see how there are nearly infinite possibilities as to how these elementary particles interact with each other. The details of the reality begin to take form. Now, as this shape is rotating in 8 dimensions, you can see a myriad of different patterns here. Look at this one in particular. This looks a lot like Metatron's cube, doesn't it? At the heart of particle physics is pure, beautiful geometry. By now, you probably can begin to see where sacred geometry falls into this. Where did these shapes originate? Do they just come into being at random? Or does the first shape come from somewhere else? In Lesson 6, we talked about the Flower of Life, the original, perfect geometric symmetry that created the universe. This shape, as we learned, is not only the root of all mathematical proportion, light, the Platonic solids, but is also the source of every musical system in the universe, including systems both used and unknown to modern man.
It's fantastic watching them, just see that ego drop very quickly. And then when you take the same GPS down to the pyramids, there were 4 of us. I will forever regret not taking a photograph of, because there were 4 of us standing with GPSs like this. And every GPS gave you a completely different reading. Not just slightly off, but miles off. You were like, you know, in another province. It was insane, right between the 2 pyramids. Not only that, but all these ancient cultures built things according to the sacred geometric principles. So I thought, hold on, this will tell me if it's linked or not. Let me draw a golden mean spiral from Adam's calendar and see where it lands. Well, you know, I didn't have to guess. You got it. So here we can do a beautiful twist on those that want to stick to mainstream science. And we can argue the argument of probability, which is one of the most commonly argued arguments in science, isn't it? Probability. So the probability factor that the golden mean spiral accidentally ends between the pyramids is so completely out of kilt that it has to be linked. You're dealing with several million, several billion odds to 1 that it's, you know, an accident. So the probability factor plays a very important role here. We're dealing with something that's connected, and also through channelings and other psychic revelations, I've been told in no uncertain terms that we're dealing with some very advanced stuff here. And then when you connect Adam's pyramids through Great Zimbabwe, Enki's house, it lands right in the Great Pyramid of Giza. And all along the 31 degrees east longitudinal line, the Nilotic Meridian, right, which is also linked to the white lions of Timbavati, the sacred white lions of Africa. And you start seeing all this connection. It's just beautiful. It just unravels more and more. And then my beautiful friend Willem de Swart, who's decoded the numeric system and the secret numbers of God, made it very clear to me that the name Elohim equates to the number 31. Elohim, 31 degrees east longitudinal line. So this gives us an indication that the Anunnaki and the Elohim are the same group of beings. All these stone circles form. Millions and millions of stone structures all connected. Each one is completely unique, different, built with stones that ring like bells. What's going on here? Archaeological drawings show us that there are no doors and entrances, and some of them are concentric circles, like expansion, amplification chambers or something to that extent, right? So are these connectors, these channels actually like wires? Absolutely. So let's go back to what Nikola Tesla said. He said the earth rings like a bell and it's an inexhaustible source of energy if you know how to use the sound frequency of Gaia. And I believe that this is what it is. The cymatic patterns remind us of what we're looking at. The shape of Om. This is the shape of sand on a metal plate. That's what you'll find. So what we're looking at here is cymatic patterns from Earth. Each one of these stone circles just simply represents the cymatic freak or the shape of the sound of Gaia at that particular point. And this is why they connected. So they created one huge energetic field. There's one example. There's Hans Jenny's photograph, the circle in the middle and the spider's web effect outwards, the circle in the middle, spider's web effect outwards, except these were connected so they could share the energy they suck out of Mother Earth. At the core of this death ray was a thing that they used called a magnetron, a resonant cavity magnetron. Well, this is, you start a frequency in the middle, you amplify it in these resonant cavities until you decide when you want to take it out of the wires. And that magnetron is used in laser beams, it's used in microwaves, it's a technological tool used in many applications. This has got a little magnetron in it, or a klystron, and then it goes through what? It goes through a crystal to focus the light. Right? So if you're working with light, you need to use crystal because it lets the light go through it. Right? So I believe that this magnetron was used. There you go. If a magnetron a few centimeters in diameter could fry the Allied army, how much energy can a magnetron 22 meters in diameter create? Huge amounts of energy. In fact, I was made aware that it's this structure that was probably responsible for the destruction of Atlantis, because they didn't quite know how to use it and it got out of control. So I believe when you read those translations of Sitchin, where he says Enki built the earth splitter with which in the earth a gash to make, I believe this is the earth splitter or something like that, creating huge amounts of energy, putting it into the giant energy grid that connected all these stone structures in southern Africa. And that's really what it was. Everything was linked to the mining of gold, None of these were dwellings, people. We're dealing with a giant energy and work grid for the extraction and the mining and the processing of gold. And then get to the measuring of these stone structures. And I found a guy who had a very interesting device that he measured without me, and then I came back from America and I heard that he went and measured these. So I called him back. I said, I want to go back and do it with you. So I went with him, and he used to work in the satellite industry for Centec. Interesting guy, and the measurements that he showed me were just mind-blowing. Electromagnetic waves, either horizontal or vertical, coming out of the ground into the sky. Sound frequencies in hertz, the loudness in decibels, and also what he calls the heat signature. The heat signature that he explained to me, he measures up to, it's the average temperature of the ground below the soil, below the surface, down to about 300 meters. He's got all kinds of ways that he calculates this. I can't explain to you exactly how he does this, but I asked him several questions to cross-examine him to see if he was not, making it up, and it stayed constant. This is what he measured. The outside, the heat signature anywhere outside here is 5.5 degrees Celsius at the surface of the ground. The moment you move the device in there, it shoots up to 29 degrees. So it's 5.5 degrees, 29 degrees. 5.5 degrees, 20. There's no scientific explanation for that we have right now. You go in there, it goes up to 33 degrees. 5.5 degrees, 33 degrees in the middle. What's interesting, the electromagnetic field here runs at the equivalent of about 280 megahertz, but it's vertical, straight out of the ground into the sky. So it's a column of energy out of the ground into the sky. Over there, it creates like a dome-shaped effect over the circle, because you also lose GPS when you go in there. So I can now understand why you lose GPS, because it creates the circle. There's no electromagnetic activity outside. The moment you go inside there, you pick up this horizontal electromagnetic effect equivalent to about 480 megahertz. And he went into more explanation to me exactly sorry, let's go back here. And then the sound frequency you measured coming out of these walls at 14.5 gigahertz. Now, we don't measure sound frequencies at those. This is really mysterious. So, and at 72 decibels coming out of these walls. Then we went up to this one here, and it got even worse. Measured 33 gigahertz sound frequencies coming out of these walls inside here. 33 gigahertz. When you walk along this channel that ran in here, the wall was broken there, but the channel runs in there. It started like 5 degrees, it keeps going up. As you walk there, that heat signature keeps rising. By the way, the heat signature, he explained to me, can only go up to about 80 degrees Celsius, at which point it suggests that you've got a volcano under you about 300 meters below you. So that's how he's calculated it. And so at 80 degrees is the max, and nothing more is possible. So we go from 5.5, and by the time you get here, it's at 33 degrees. Around 30 degrees there. When you go from outside there, 5.5 degrees, onto that little attachment there, inside, shoots up to 58 degrees. 5.5 degrees, 58 degrees. There's just no reason why it should be doing that. The human race, they referred to the Anunnaki who were doing the gold mining as the heroes, because they were doing the hard work in the gold mines. So for the heroes into Earth's bowels to descend. The Earth Splitter, that Enki established. Now I'm going to show you the Earth Splitter, because this is one of my discoveries in South Africa. Therewith, in the earth a gash to make, by way of tunnels, Earth's innards to reach, the golden veins to uncover. Boy, now that we found the physical evidence in South Africa and Zimbabwe, mostly, suddenly Sitchin's word becomes like poetry, because we can point to what he's referring to. We've got the physical evidence for which he's often undergone a lot of criticism, Oh, he's making this stuff up. Well, anyone who's still a naysayer about Sitchin's work, wake up. We got the physical evidence. It's there in beyond believable abundance. Is there a ruin or a settlement that could be linked to Enki? Absolutely. And this is Great Zimbabwe, the greatest ruin in southern Africa. It has to be the biggest, right? This is just a spectacular place. And just to show you, some of the walls are 10 meters high and 6 meters wide. Great Zimbabwe is a spectacular sight. And it has got Enki's energetic imprint all over it. Any of you that do energetic work, go and look at it. You're not going to believe your eyes. What's so special about the ruins in southern Africa? Well, they're very special cattle kraal for very special cattle. Because this is probably where the word holy cow comes from. Because Because most of these cattle kraal are built aligned to the sun and the stars and the equinoxes and the solstices and wow, they went to a lot of trouble for these cattle, didn't they? And the sacred geometry, and you start seeing how sacred geometric principles just jump out of it, out of these structures, and you realize, hold on, this is not just somebody building things, you know, to pass time. They were, and really this was easy to these people, because every single one of these ruins that is measured, and this is all Jan Heine's original pioneering work, for which you'll always be remembered, because every ruin that he's measured so far turns out to have these very intricate alignments. But this is spectacular, and you'll understand why this is so spectacular when you realize how many of these ruins there are. These, you know, look at this, they're perfect, and you draw a circle over there, which doesn't look like it's real, but when you extrapolate that flat line into the circle, you get a perfect hexagon. When you start joining the corners of the hexagon, look how it touches the inner circle perfectly. You know, this is not accidental, people. This takes real exact science and understanding. There you go. So these structures down there are not just simplistic structures, they carry huge amounts of energy. And important to note that there are no doors or entrances. This is an important thing that you find in some of the archaeological reports. Sound levitates. All ancient cultures talk about levitating things with sound. Not just sound, but also with mind and thought. Now, we hear about it all the time, but until you see something being levitated by sound, it's difficult to comprehend. Here's a beautiful example. Most of the stuff exists on YouTube, but we don't go looking for it. So, and in there lies the problem. He's dead. He took his secret to his grave. We will never find out until we go there, try and wrestle it out of his family to share the secret with the rest of the world. I can't believe that in all of the world of science and the the amazing laboratories that we have, there haven't been some scientists that have reverse engineered this or figured this out. Can't be that difficult. It's a resonant harmonic frequency of boiling water. Reverse engineer it. Measure the resonant harmonic frequency of boiling water and build the device. I don't have the laboratory to do it, but you know, I've asked so many people to go out and do it, and no one's done it. So, but what we learn from this experience is, we're here at this conference talking about free energy. I believe free energy means free to the world, not just free that we can suck it out of the vacuum and then sell it to the rest of the world. That's no longer free energy. I believe it's crucial that we start thinking about free energy as, when you find it, like this guy, give it to the world for free. Because if you don't, they're going to get to you, they're going to get rid of you, and no one's going to get it. They were waiting. I can imagine what they did when Peter Davey died. They breathed a sigh of relief. So, oh, thank God he's gone. And he was too greedy to tell the world how the simple thing worked. Thank God this human greed gene is so powerful that it prevents people from sharing this beautiful stuff. That's what I have a problem with. So what I urge anyone here at this conference to do, if you do find something like this, a source of free energy, do not keep it to yourself. Do not try and gain from the rest of humanity. Put it on the internet, make videos, put it out as widely as you can, share it for free with the world. It'll come back to you in abundance that you can't imagine. Sound levitates. All ancient cultures talk about levitating things with sound. Not just sound, but also with mind and thought. Now, we hear about it all the time, but until you see something being levitated by sound, it's difficult to comprehend. Here's a beautiful example. Most of the stuff exists on YouTube, but we don't go looking for it. So, notice that you can hear the sound frequencies because the items they're levitating are very light. Remember, the higher the frequency, the higher the energy. So these polystyrene items are very light, so the frequency is lower frequency that's audible to our ears. So when you try to levitate giant blocks, you would need very high frequencies that you can't hear, and then it looks like magic. Also note that the sound source comes from two different sound sources, and it seems to levitate it at the cross point, the crossroad of the sound frequencies. That's what the levitation effect is. This is very important later in my presentation. And the knowledge of the ancient cultures. Sound variation and the thing starts to tumble and spin. Slightest little variation on the frequency. Look where it starts to spin. So sound levitates. It's no longer, you know, this fairy tale thing. It really happens. But sound source is also the inspiration for all the religions in the world, the great religions, and the most recognized religious symbols. This is from the guys that developed the cymoscope. I normally show the cymoscope, but lack of time. So look at this 3D bubble that is created as sound. Remember, sound is a three-dimensional thing. From the pop, it goes in all directions. It's not a wave on a piece of paper. It's a three-dimensional effect that keeps amplifying itself and goes on and on and on. Just because you can't hear it anymore doesn't mean it's not necessarily there. So here's a three-dimensional bubble that's created at the sound, but look on the right-hand side at the cross-section of it. What do you see? You start seeing one of the most commonly recognized religious symbols. Why did the religions choose the symbols? Because when you drill right into the middle of this, what seems to be at the very source of sound, the pop, or that moment, instant of pop, this is what you get. Oh boy, do I recognize this interesting symbol. And this is where you realize when the ancient cultures carved these intricate things into rock, they weren't just imagining things, they understood that sound was the source and how sound can create and levitate and manifest shape and form. And that's why they carved hundreds of thousands of these crosses in circles. And not only did they carve it, but it's also recognized by ancient cultures. In southern Africa, it's known as Mabona, the Lord of Light. Lord of Light, sound and light, the creator of all things, the source of all things. And you see this shape repeat itself in some of the most popular religious symbols, like the Coptic and the pagan crosses. You see the sacred geometric patterns imitate themselves in these symbols. It becomes very interesting because now you know where they get the symbols from. It all comes from sound. What does this have to do with ancient civilizations and evolution of consciousness? Well, everything, because the ancient cultures understood this. They understood the process, they understood the source, and they used the source of sound as a source of energy. And this is what my discoveries show in South Africa. The resonating chambers for creation of energy, that's what the pyramids were. Many researchers are starting to reach that conclusion, that they were actually resonating cavities to create huge amounts of energy. And they would have looked something like this. What's also clear to me, the more research I do, especially at the sites in South Africa, realizing that we're dealing with sound and light, that they probably used light to activate some of these sound devices. They were actually resonating chambers, that it was activated by light. And this is why they were aligned with solstices and equinoxes with specific frequencies and energetic alignments of the movement of the sun. They would activate these ancient sites and then bring them to life, something like that. And if you think that's not happening, there's an interesting photograph that is available on the internet of some strange energy forms coming out of the pyramids, taken with some weird lens that shows you energetic frequencies. And this got me very excited because this is directly connected to my discoveries in the stone circles of southern Africa. This is some interesting symmetrical interference patterns that were taken at Stonehenge, which tells us that Stonehenge was not an accidental bunch of, long-haired, loincloth, cavemen that built this with ropes and pulleys. And when you go to Stonehenge, they still have that image on the side of the tunnel as you walk towards Stonehenge. They still show the guys with ropes and pulleys building Stonehenge. It's insane. So it's a very, very advanced device, Stonehenge. And what blew my mind is how old Stonehenge is. This is probably one of the oldest sites on Earth. It's probably more than 1 million years old. Are there any geologists here? Any geologists? Well, most of you are homemade geologists. So. You're told that that stone there fell over. It was the twin of that stone, and it fell over. Right? They were connected at the top, and it broke when it fell over. Well, there's the break. Okay, now this is sarsen stone. It's very, very hard, one of the hardest stones known to us. There's the break. Does that look like a 5,000-year-old break and erosion? Absolutely not. We're dealing with hundreds of thousands, probably millions of years of erosion to erode about this far. This is not a new structure, people. Stonehenge is extremely old. Your mother will lie to you, your priest will lie to you, but the geology is not going to lie to you. There it is. Do with this what you want. It tells us we're dealing with ancient sites and advanced knowledge of sound frequency, because we see it in the patterns that the Stonehenge site still generates today, even though it is in the state of disrepair. Just like the stone circles in South Africa, in the incredible state of disrepair, are still giving us insane amount of energy that we don't know what to do with.
In the flower of life. I believe this is what is at the heart of what's forming every subatomic particle formation, and it probably goes at least a few levels deeper than what Garrett is showing us. Now we can start talking about dimensions. These wheels are some of the oldest symbols known. The only places that they've been found is on the ceilings of certain very old Egyptian tombs. They are always found in sets of 4 or 8, and nobody knows what they are. Even the most famous Egyptologists have no idea, but this is actually proof that the Egyptians not only understood the flower of life, but they lived it. Today, I'm going to show you what these wheels meant, and in future lessons we will go over the details of this unraveling. There's a lot to cover before we get there though. For the record, the unraveling looks like this. Yeah, it's a doozy. So on the walls with these wheels are drawings of 7 people with animal heads. They're called Neiters, and each of them has an orangish red oval above its head. This is called the egg of metamorphosis. The Neiters are showing us a time when we go through a certain stage of resurrection, which is a rapid biological change into a different life form. Not the average type of resurrection, I know. As you can see here, they're changing directions 90 degrees, and in doing so, they're changing dimensions. See, the dimensional levels are separated by 90 degrees. Musical notes are separated by 90 degrees. The chakras are also 90 degrees. It's a number that continually appears. Probably at this point we should get a common understanding of what dimensions are. Like 3rd dimension, 4th dimension, 5th dimension. What are we talking about here? Most people think of dimension in terms of time and space, the X, Y, and Z axis, with time becoming the 4th dimension. This is not what we are talking about. What we're seeing as the various dimensional levels has more to do with music and harmonics than anything else. A piano has 8 white keys from C to C, which is the familiar octave, and in between there are 5 black keys. Together this creates what is called the chromatic scale, which is 13 notes, well actually 12, with the 13th being the first in the next octave. So from one C to the next is really 13 steps, not 8. This also correlates with the 7, 8, and 13 chakra system I mentioned in lesson 2. Keeping that in mind, I want to show you a sine wave. Sine waves correspond with light and the electromagnetic spectrum and the vibration of sound. We're all very familiar with this. In this entire reality we're in, every single thing is based on sine waves. There are no exceptions to this except for maybe spirit and void. Quantum physics and quantum mechanics looks at everything in the reality of one of 2 ways. You can look at anything, like the computer you're watching this video on, to be made up of tiny particles like atoms. Or you can forget about that idea completely and look at it as a vibration, a waveform, such as electromagnetic fields or even sound. If you look at it as atoms, the laws can be seen to fit that model. But if you look at it as waveforms, the laws can be seen to fit that model. Both of these systems come out of the flower of life, one being the one we just looked at, fruit of life to Metatron's cube and beyond, and the other being this beautiful mess of a picture. Just looking at it hurts my head. Everything in this world is a waveform, or can be seen as sound. All things, your bodies, planets, absolutely everything, are a waveform. If you choose this particular way of looking at reality, and then superimpose that view over the reality of the harmonics of music, we can begin to talk about dimensions. The dimensional levels are nothing but different base rate wavelengths. The only difference between this dimension and any other is the length of its basic waveform. It's just like a radio set. Turn the dial, you pick up a wavelength. It's the same with dimensions. If you were to change the wavelength of your consciousness, and in doing so change all of your body patterns to a wavelength different from this universe, you would literally disappear out of this world and reappear in the one you were tuned in. It's been theorized that the base rate wavelength that we're currently living in is 7.23 centimeters. There's a few reasons for this. In a spiritual sense, the 7.23 wavelength is Om, the Hindu sound of the universe. Maybe that's why Oming is such a powerful tool in meditation. Not only that, but if you were to take 100 people and measure the distance between their eyes, the average length is 7.23. Same with the distance from the tip of our chins to the tip of our noses, and the distance across our palms and between our chakras. This 7.23 length is located throughout our bodies in various ways because we are immersed within this particular dimension. There's another reason as well. Bell Laboratories found this wavelength when they were setting up the microwave system around the United States. They found static in their system because they chose a wavelength just slightly longer than 7.23 for their system. In order to get rid of the static, they did something that we as a planet are still suffering from. They upped the power 50,000 times over what we would normally need, which created a very powerful field, so that the 7.23 wavelength would not interfere. It's for those reasons that I believe 7.23 is the wavelength of our dimension. As you go up in dimensional levels, the wavelength gets shorter and shorter, with higher and higher energy. As you go down in levels, the wavelength gets longer and longer, with lower and lower energy, more and more dense. Just as with a piano, there's a space between the notes, so that when you hit one note, there's a very definite place where the next note is. In this waveform universe we exist in, there's a very definite place where the next dimensional level exists. Its specific wavelength relative to this one. Most cultures in the cosmos have a basic understanding of this and understand how to change between dimensions. However, because of certain events that happened on Earth 13,000 years ago, we have all forgotten, but we're about to remember. So if we show each note in the chromatic scale as a circle, we have 13 circles. Each circle represents a white or black key, and the shaded circle at the end would be the 13th note, that begins the next octave. This circle here represents the third dimension. This is where we are, and this circle next to it would be the fourth. In Lesson 3, we talked about channeling, and this is typically where channeled beings are. This is also where you explore when you are astral projecting or lucid dreaming. You'll notice now that the musical system goes upwards and downwards forever, octaves over octaves over octaves. Theoretically, this is how the universe goes too, an infinite spectrum of universes in both directions going upwards and downwards forever. You may have heard people talk about 144 dimensions and how 144 relates to other spiritual subjects. This is because there are 12 notes in an octave and 12 overtones between each note. 12 times 12 equals 144 dimensional levels. To be specific, there are 12 major dimensions and 132 minor dimensions within each octave, though in truth this progression probably goes on forever. The diagram we'd be looking at represents one octave. The 13th note repeats, and then there's another octave after that. Looks like I'm about done for the day. I want to show you this. I was watching Ancient Aliens not long ago, and one of the natives who has communication with beings in higher dimensions told the man who was interviewing him
that they have always been here, even right here where we're sitting right now, but you just don't see them. They're in a different frequency.
And no one really got what he meant. So that's kind of a fresh perspective on that.
All of physical matter, everything we have around us, is the result of a frequency. And what that also means is that if you amplify the frequency, the structure of the matter will change.
Watch it before your eyes. Everything owes its existence solely and completely to sound. Sound is the factor which holds it together. Sound is the basis of form and shape. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. We are told that this is how the worlds began and how creation took shape. If we put that into the modern idiom and say that into the great voids of space came a sound and matter took shape. Please watch carefully.
We can also use different shaped plate. Here we have a triangular plate with a crystal attached to its underside and produce a sonorous figure. We change to a higher note and see a rather more complicated figure. We use sand and lycopodium. The lycopodium moves to the center of the fields and takes up circular shapes. The sand forms the lines. Each material has its own special way of behaving.
The universe is infinite. It has no beginning and no end. In both science and religion, creation is often discussed from a perspective of having a set or a specific beginning. In science, we call it the Big Bang. This is the theory that says everything in the universe was compressed to the point of a single, infinitesimally small particle. Something we would perceive as unity, and then rapidly exploded and expanded outwards and created everything in the universe. In religion, it is generally called creation, when God, or some all-knowing and all-seeing entity, being the only one imbued with such power, created everything, presumably in 6 days, before taking a well-deserved day off. Let's take a step outside the box for a second and put these two sides of this cosmic coin into a Vesica Pisces. As usual, the two enemies that never got along actually have quite a lot in common. Both say that the universe started with unity and expanded outwards. Both say that light was an important factor in creation as well. If at the beginning of the universe we were one essence and somehow became everything, then both are saying the same thing, that we came from the same source. But wait a second, how can we make sense out of that statement, the universe is infinite, if we are measuring it from a sense of having a beginning? And this is what we're going to talk about now. If we value the pursuit of knowledge, we must be free to follow wherever that search may lead us. The free mind is not a barking dog to be tethered on a 10-foot chain. Today, I want to talk about two specific energies that can be expressed through this image. The energy that flows here is male and female energy. Male energy is focused, and female energy is creative and random. Neither of them is greater nor weaker than the other, and both can be extremely powerful when fully manifested. Female energy is the land of unbridled possibilities, creative potential, and affecting the universe from within. Focused male energy takes direct roads from point A to point B. This energy can be as strong as a tank, accomplishing tasks and going where it needs to go with precision and without distraction. The important thing to know about this energy isn't how they move. I'm going to use some super basic sacred geometry to demonstrate this. This is the Fibonacci spiral. We're going to be talking a lot more about it when we dive into the topic. For now, all you have to know is that it starts at 1 and flows outward forever in a very specific way, and is present in all life everywhere. As male energy flows through the spiral, it goes from base point to point, from here to here, to here to here. It doesn't curve, it just goes straight where it needs to be. Female energy, however, would flow in the actual spiral. It would go around, going in and around outside all of the lines, but still getting to the same or similar results. This is the graphic representation of how it flows, but it also acts in the same way. From this understanding, you can see how we use these energies in our lives. It's the difference between driving straight to work and being on schedule all the time, and taking the scenic route because it's a more pleasant ride, even if it means being late. It's baking a cake strictly by what it says in the cookbook, and putting it together with what just feels right. It's getting that promotion for working the hardest, and getting that promotion for coming up with the best ideas. Here's a relatable example. It's the difference between Inception and Sucker Punch. Both about dreams, but one of them being the masculine story of professional men just doing their no-nonsense work, trying to get the job done, and the other being the feminine story that was creative and random and, according to many, didn't make much sense. Both male and female energy, like the chakras, have their own traits. Male energy is linear, analytical, strategic, and practical. However, when male energy is constricted, it is very blundering and confrontational, and what tends to occur is not seeing all sides of a situation, or not being open to any other possibility other than the one being pursued. You can see a lot of that in today's society. Most commonly, we call it being closed-minded. Female energy, on the other hand, moves in curves. It does not stay inside the lines. It is creativity and movement, and expression and emotion. It can do anything and go anywhere, but it has trouble sticking to schedule. If constricted, it can get out of its flow, running rampant between emotions and mood swings and ideas. The creativity could get jumbled and come out as an out-of-control mess. We don't have this widespread issue in today's society, and it has a lot to do with our brain hemispheres. We're going to look at that in a moment. One big difference between the two is that male energy looks at parts, and female energy looks at wholes. Before I go on, I want to make this clear. Male and female energy has very little to do with sexual orientation. Like, it's in the mix, but it's not a fundamental part of the energy itself. For example, if you look at the shape of male and female bodies, men have straighter bodies, women have curvier bodies. We'll probably come back to this in a lesson down the road. Okay, brain hemispheres. We have 2 of them, and if you remember what you learned in grade 10 biology, this will be familiar. The left brain is the male energy side of the brain. It is orderly, statistical, logical, and mathematical. It sees things in straight lines, rational and practical. The right brain is the female energy side of the brain. It is our creative side, a free spirit, this passion and experience of taste and feeling, movement and art. As is the same with the energy, the left brain cannot make sense out of the right brain. You cannot put feelings and expressions within boxes. They must be felt to be truly experienced. The right brain, too, cannot make sense about how the left brain understands things. Okay, so as a species, we are primarily left-brained. Well, incredibly left-brained. This basically means that, as a species, we essentially have a male energy imbalance. There is way too much of it. It is dominant and is constricting on the female side of the brain. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't a bad thing. In fact, it's kind of a blessing in disguise, but we have to talk about some other things first. Everything in the universe is geometric, whether it's people, trees, cats, planets, solar systems, stars, you name it. Anything in the universe can be measured on a geometric scale. Having said that, it's important to note that creation is also geometric. What we're going to be looking at today is the pattern of creation. Essentially what this means is that everything in the universe comes out of this single pattern. I'm not making this up. This single image will change everything. When I mentioned in Lesson 5 that the ancient Egyptians and even more ancient civilizations knew about a deeper, basic understanding of the universe, this is the flower of life, and it is also the creation pattern of everything in existence. Even non-tangible things, emotions, thoughts, music in its entire spectrum, everything comes from this image. Okay, so there are 13 information systems that comes out of the flower of life. Today, I'm going to show you how physical reality can manifest itself, which is just one of the 13 systems. In future lessons, we will look at more. It's also important to note that at first it may not make sense. I ask that you do not choose immediately to shut this out, and just watch with an open mind, and try and see this in a new way. Also, I want to tell you that by learning about sacred geometry simply by observing, you are absorbing only a very minuscule amount of information. If you really want to learn more, you must begin to draw it yourself. I kid you not, when you do this, you begin to see things in a new way. You begin to understand why things are done in the way that they are done. Promise. The flower of life was known around the world in ancient times. It was found in Ireland, Turkey, Israel, Egypt, China, Greece, Germany, India, and Iceland. It's also been recorded to have been found in England, Tibet, Japan, Sweden, Lapland, the Yucatan, and I think 14 other places. This thing is everywhere. Not only that, but everywhere around the world it has the same name, the flower of life. Now, to understand the flower of life, first we have to talk about how it's formed. This could get incredibly complex, so I'll try and keep it simple. Imagine consciousness, or spirit, floating in a void, which means it's nothingness, and then spirit. No physical body or mind, just spirit, and that's it. Then blackness, essentially nothing, all around the spirit, for infinite. Spirit decides to do something, so it expands its consciousness all around itself as far as it can go without moving. It creates a sphere around itself. This is the first circle in the flower of life. Then, spirit has an awareness of what's around itself in 360 degrees. It moves to the very edge of the sphere anywhere and repeats what it did the first time. It creates this image, which also creates the Vesica Pisces. Within the Vesica Pisces is a vast and incredible amount of knowledge about width, proportion, depth. Also comes the square roots of 2, 3, and 5, which are all numbers that go on forever. But even more interestingly, comes geometric information about light. We'll talk about that in a moment. Now, spirit has no choice but to do it again. Spirit is flawless, and therefore it will move flawlessly, creating the next circle either here or here, exactly one radius away from the other circle next to it. Every time spirit moves another sphere, more and more knowledge comes out of the image that is created. The first complete image to be formed is this. It has two names, the seed of life, or the Genesis pattern, and for good reason. Now, let's look at the book of Genesis for a second. Each of these movements, or creations of circles, can be seen as another day. On the first movement, the second sphere, it created knowledge about not only mathematical proportions, but light. The first sentence of Genesis says, "The earth was without form and void, and that the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." In the very next sentence, God says, "Let there be light." The key here is in the order. The movement happened first, then light happened immediately after. Well, but what about the waters? Well, you have to remember that the Bible has been changed over time a lot. The ancient Egyptians would say that the way our modern Bibles begin creation is impossible, especially if you think about it from a physics point of view. Imagine a dark, infinite space that goes on forever and ever in all directions. You're just floating there with nothing. You can't really fall, but where would you fall to? From a purely physics or mathematical point of view, motion itself, or kinetic energy, is absolutely impossible in a void. You can't even rotate, because motion cannot become real unless there's one other object in the space around you. So the ancient Egyptians would say that before God moved upon the face of the waters, it would first have to create something to move relative to. So, Genesis pattern, after 3 spheres, you get the Holy Trinity. Another interesting one, it says in many Bibles of the world, not just the Christian Bible, that on the 4th day of Genesis, exactly 1/2 of creation was completed. Starting from the first motion, exactly 1/2 of the circles were formed on the 4th day. 5th day of Genesis, 6th circle, more information, and then on the 6th day, a geometric miracle takes place. The last circle forms a complete 6-petaled flower. This is what many earlier Bibles meant when they said, "In the beginning there were 6." Our Bible even said creation was formed in 6 days, and this fits exactly. This is the pattern of Genesis, and so it's called the Genesis pattern. It's also the beginning of the creation of the universe that we live in. These original movements of spirit are really important, but now let's look at something even cooler. Another image that comes out of this pattern is this. It's called the Tree of Life. Many may recognize this as the Jewish or Hebrew Kabbalah, but the Kabbalah did not originate this image, and there is proof. The Tree of Life does not belong to any culture, not even the Egyptians, who carved the Tree of Life on 2 sets of 3 pillars at Karnak Temple, Luxor, over 5,000 years ago. It's outside any race or religion, as with all of these images. There are patterns that are intimately connected with nature. You'll also notice that every circle on the Tree of Life is either the length or width of the Vesica Pisces. The second image beyond Genesis in the Flower of Life is the Egg of Life. This is formed during the second vortex motion. Upon its completion, it creates an image like this, a 3-dimensional shape that you can hold in your hand. If you were to connect their centers, you would see a cube. So what? Who cares? Well, the ancient Egyptians did, because they were concerned with creation, life, and death. They called this cluster of spheres the egg of life. You probably won't believe me just yet, but this shape is the morphogenic structure that created your body. Your entire physical existence is dependent on the egg of life structure, and everything about you was created from that form. Everything from your eye color to how long your fingers are. This is a whole lesson on its own, so let's move on for now. All around the world, the flower of life was always made the exact same way. See, this pattern can clearly go on forever. However, they always stopped after 19 circles. Why? Well, because they didn't want you to see what I'm about to show you. Back then, this image and knowledge was so sacred that they couldn't allow it to become common knowledge. It was appropriate at that time. However, now we either use the information or fall further into darkness. In biology, all cells have a zona pellucida around the edge. These circles around the flower of life are the zona pellucida of the flower of life. You must remove these, then complete the spheres that were cut off by the zona pellucida. With one more step, you will have the secret. Finish the drawing, add the final missing circles, giving you this. This image is the fruit of life. This pattern of 13 circles is one of the holiest, most sacred forms in existence. It's called the fruit because it is the result, the fruit, from which the fabric of the details of the reality were created. Remember when we talked about male and female energy, lesson 4? As you can see, this image is female. It has no straight lines. However, when you combine male lines with these female circles, something amazing happens. What you do is draw a straight line from the very center of every single circle to every other circle in this image. When you do this, you get an image which is known throughout the universe, everywhere, as Metatron's cube. It is one of the most important informational systems in the universe, one of the basic creation patterns in existence. So what is Metatron's cube? Well, anyone who has studied sacred geometry, or even regular geometry for that matter, knows that there are 5 unique shapes in the universe, and that they are crucial to understanding both regular and sacred geometry. They are called the Platonic solids. A Platonic solid has certain characteristics by definition. First of all of its faces are the same size. For example, a cube, the most well-known Platonic solid, has a square on every face, so all of its faces are the same size. Secondly, the edges of the Platonic solids are all the same length. All edges of the cube are the same length. Third, it only has one size of interior angles between the faces. In the case of the cube, this angle is 90 degrees. And fourth, when put inside of a sphere, all of the points will touch the edge of the sphere perfectly. With that definition, there are only 4 shapes besides the cube that fit that description. So what are they? Well, we have the dodecahedron, the tetrahedron, the octahedron, the isosahedron, and the hexahedron. All of these shapes are found within Metatron's cube. This knowledge is also where original alchemy came from. The ancient alchemists and great souls like Pythagoras, father of Greece, considered each shape to have an elemental aspect to them. The tetrahedron was considered fire, the cube was earth, the octahedron was air, the isosahedron was water, and the dodecahedron was ether. Ether, also known as prana, and tachyon energy are all the same thing. They extend anywhere and are accessible at any point in space, time, and dimension. This is the great secret of zero-point technology. The sphere is voidness. These 6 elements are the building blocks of the universe, and they create the qualities of the universe. To summarize, this is the first informational system that comes out of the fruit of life through Metatron's cube. In alchemy, they rarely discussed ether. I've read that in the Pythagorean school, if you even uttered the word dodecahedron outside of the school, they would kill you on the spot. That's how sacred this shape was. 200 years later, when Plato was alive, he would discuss it, but only very carefully. This is because the dodecahedron is near the outer edge in your energy field, and is the highest form of consciousness. There's quite a bit more here, but I don't think I can go much further on it right now. Sound, harmonics, music, and matter are all interrelated in all of creation. Today, we will look at the third system. The fruit of life will reveal itself in the process. We'll call this system the circles and squares of human consciousness. It is what the Chinese called circling the square and squaring the circle. Remember when we discussed the Platonic solids in lesson 6? I showed you that all of them will sit perfectly within a sphere, each with every corner touching the sphere perfectly. Well, there's one other shape that can do that. It's a characteristic that only one of the Platonic solids have, making it special. It is the cube, which you can put every single Platonic solid inside, and an edge or point will touch the inside of the cube perfectly. Through truncating the cube in different ways, you can create all of the other shapes. Because of this characteristic, it essentially means that the cube is like the father of all shapes. It is a male form. And the sphere is the mother of all shapes. It is a female form. All levels of consciousness in the universe are integrated by a single image in sacred geometry. It is the key to space, time, and dimension, as well as consciousness itself. Each level is a geometric image or lens that spirit looks through to see the one reality, resulting in a completely different experience. In the case of humans, this image is the circle and square. This is what Leonardo da Vinci was doing when he drew this drawing, and I'm going to show you what this circle and square combination mean. If you put a circle inside a square perfectly, and then continue to put another circle and square, each with the same diameter, one radius away on all sides, going outwards, you get a drawing that looks like this. You'll notice that with the first circle and square, they fit perfectly within the other. This also happens with the second circle and square. However, then the squares begin penetrating circles. The male form begins interacting with the female form. Why is this important? Well, the circles and squares begin to equate the phi ratio. See, when the circumference of a circle and the perimeter of the square are equal, this equates the phi ratio. So as you can see on this diagram, on the fourth square and the fifth circle, it begins to create the phi ratio. It's close, but not perfect. It's only a 0.6 difference. I'm measuring in radii, by the way. The inner circle has a radius of 1, so it's 2 radii across. The next is 4, and then 6, 8, 10, and so on. So the one we just looked at makes a close phi ratio, and then it moves out of sync, staying out of sync for a bit, and then bam! Again, it moves into yet another phi ratio. This time, the difference is only 0.52, even closer to perfection than before. This will continue on forever. If you were to continue this drawing outwards to infinity, each time it would go into sync, drop out of sync for a few circles and squares, but then eventually hit phi again closer than it did the last time. Right now, there are 3 primary levels of consciousness that we are going to be talking about. They are essentially who we were, who we are, and who we will be. We'll call it the first, second, and third, so that it's easy to understand what we're talking about. The ancient Egyptians were very concerned with these 3 levels as well, and much of their culture was based on this information. Each of these levels has their own geometric lens too, which look like this. We'll come back to these soon. This is the first level of consciousness, and this is the third. We are on neither of these 2 phi levels on the circle and square chart. Where we are, the second level of consciousness, is here. We are on the 5th square relative to the 6th circle. For quite a while now, I've been saying that we're at a disharmonic level, and it's something that we're passing through as a species. Now you begin to see the bigger picture of what I meant. The reason it's disharmonic is because it does not equate a phi ratio, not even close. Disharmonic levels are important because they bridge a gap between the divine, pure levels. However, when a species is here, it has to get in and get out as fast as possible, or else they will destroy themselves and everything around them incredibly quickly. You can see this happening all around the world today, because we're at the very end of it, and everything is crashing down on us. We've discussed this all before, notably in the intros of Lesson 1 and 2. So the reason that we're on this circle and square combination and not the 6th square relative to some other circle is because of this. If you take the square and rotate it 45 degrees, it actually creates a bridge. It connects us from 2 harmonic levels of being. We're moving from one state of being to the other, this time even closer to source. This is a very exciting time for us. Oh, let me show you this too. This is how the Great Pyramid is set up. This chamber here is called the King's Chamber. If you cut the Great Pyramid horizontally at the King's Chamber, which was the main initiation chamber, and rotate the top half 45 degrees, it makes the exact same image as our level of consciousness. There's a reason for that. The Great Pyramid is the key instrument in allowing humans to reach the 3rd level of consciousness, both as a species and individually. In fact, that's part of the reason why the Great Pyramids were created in the first place. Let's talk more about these levels though. So what Leonardo was drawing was actually the first level of consciousness. See how he hid lines in this drawing? If you complete this grid, it creates an 8x8 grid. This is the same 64 square grid found on the first level. Measuring in radii, this grid is 8x8. However, the circle has 10 radii across, so we'll call this first level an 8x10. This is where we were. The first level is the first time self-aware consciousness began. The second level has 10 squares across the large square, and a 12 radii circle, so we'll call it a 10x12. This is where we are now. This level is the 3rd level, which is also called Christ consciousness. It is a 14x18. Now, there's always a reason for everything in sacred geometry. Nothing, absolutely nothing, happens without a reason. Everything is connected. Out of the whole spectrum of possibilities, why did self-aware human consciousness begin when the 4th square went into harmony with the 5th circle? Well, let's overlay the fruit of life over our first level for a second. Look at that! It exactly fits the 4th square and 5th circle perfectly. Do you see the perfection of life? The fruit of life pattern was hidden beneath this pattern all along. They're precisely superimposed over the other. In a right brain way, this is how to explain why consciousness first became self-aware between the 4th square and 5th circle. This sacred image was part of the pattern. The fruit of life was completed at the precise moment that the phi ratio first appeared, and when phi appeared, consciousness had a way to manifest in a new way. Throughout time, many scholars have tried to figure out the secret meaning behind what Leonardo meant with the Vitruvian Man drawing. He was showing us human consciousness. This is where we were, the first level. There is a man who did draw our level though. Da Vinci was studying the works of a man named Vitruvius, who lived 1400 years before Da Vinci, hence the name Vitruvian Man. Vitruvius actually drew his own drawing of consciousness as well, and this is what it looked like. The circle and squares in this one are hidden, less obvious than the Da Vinci drawing. Regardless, they're there, and this is the current circle and square combination around our bodies. This drawing also contains the exact proportions of the Merkaba, which is an important energy system outside of the body, similar to how chakras are an energy system inside the body. This image also contains the diamond that perfectly contains the man from head to feet. This is the same image we saw in the consciousness chart, as well as the Great Pyramid. Further proof that this was what Vitruvius was demonstrating to us when he created this image. So here we have drawings of the first 2 levels of consciousness. From what I know, there is no drawing of a third. If there is, it's sealed up, locked away somewhere, and is probably one of the most sacred drawings in existence. And light that we've been looking at before. If you line that up with the chakras, you can see how we go from a super dense space up to the highest frequency, until we once again connect with the same source that we were originally connected to. Doesn't that look familiar on the Flower of Life? If these theories about the Flower of Life are true, then that means this entire experience of human history and ascension and growth and evolution is just one wave of energy from one point to another on an infinite universe of possibilities. Each point is the supreme awareness of some aspect of the God Source consciousness field. And the energy that moves between it is the vibrations and waves of energy that we are experiencing, called the electromagnetic field. As much smaller fractals of the same source energy have experiences through these waves. This image also doesn't account for the number of parallel realities that we could experience at this point. If the Flower of Life expands in these directions, then this is just one direction. Maybe instead of total destruction, which is what this image depicts, instead we make our first ET contact on this spiral and join our galactic family. On this wave, maybe something else happens. Like, we start getting superpowers, like in Heroes or something. Maybe all of that can happen right here too. Now, regardless of all of the potentials we can come up with, let's bring it back to this diagram. Think about how this applies in your life. Every day you live could be seen as one mini spiral. However, 7 small spirals make one larger one across the 7 small ones. This is a week. Then several weeks create a month. Several months create a year. You can map that over your life and see from birth to death, which is just like the Mayan calendar, not the end, but a transition into a new level of life. This is such an exciting time for us. As mentioned earlier, we cannot know what is going to happen, and I'm not going to tell you it's going to be this or that, because I don't know either. We will change the outcome depending on our being. What's going to happen? You decide.
Happening all the time that remains invisible to our current technology and awareness? What if we understood its secret? Oh my God, we would know how to talk to the Creator, nature, science, and each other, and interstellar civilizations.